Hey guys, so in this video we're going to be looking at Photoshop and then specifically the layers panel within your Photoshop workspace. This is going to be one of your most used tools because you're always going to be working with layers, and being able to manage those and understanding all the different things you can do is really valuable to your workflow. So I'm just going to make a new blank document. The first thing to look at is over here. So this is going to be your layers panel. So in the default setting you may have some different things here and the layers may be squished down. What I typically do is any window that I know I'm not going to need, so like let's say color, you probably have this one up there. I typically just kind of grab those guys and pull them out and either hit the X, or if you think you may use it, you can drag it and stick it here on this little guy. I like to make my workspace, I like the navigator. This will show you basically like what your drawing looks like. So let's say I just draw a shape. Let's make a new layer. So I'm going to draw this shape. So the navigator shows you can use it to zoom in and out, but typically I just use it to have another point of view. So if I'm zoomed in really close, I can still kind of see the big picture of what my drawing is looking like. So I think that's pretty helpful. It's kind of like taking a step back and looking at your work without having to move. So the most important thing here is the layers panel. So I like to make my workspace as big as I can so that I can see the layer. So I'm gonna just full screen my image. So I'm gonna hit Control-0. So I'm going to go back to the selection tool. Over here in layers you have a couple different things that are important to kind of take a minute to see. The first one that I always recommend is changing the way the previews work. This is just kind of something that you don't have to do, but it makes your life a lot easier. So let's also add a text. So let's put in here tutorial. So you see, just by adding that, it's made a new layer. It has a big T to let you know it's text, and you can always go back if you use the text tool or you hit the T key. Up here you'll see all the keys I'm pressing, and then you can edit this to say something different, or you can make it a different font. So I'm going to back out of all those. So now we have a couple different layers. If you wanted to import an image, you can just go File, Place Embedded. So let's say I wanted to put a tree. So now I've got these different kinds of layers. A quick way to select 3 different layers, you can look over here and click on them. You can, when you make a new layer, you have a few options here. So this eyeball will turn the layer on and off. If you just click on it with a left click, it does that. If you select on it anywhere here, you're going to pick that layer. So now let's say I wanted to move. I'm selecting that layer. If I select this layer and move, now it will be here. Now it's important that you don't have this one selected. If you have auto select checked, it won't matter what layer you have. As soon as you click on something, it will switch to that layer. See how it jumped to that one? So now if I'm on the tree layer, but if I click here, see it jumped to that one. So one easy way to get around that, you either turn off auto select, and then if you wanted to choose a different layer, you can click here. So that's one way to do it. Another way is if you just know that Photoshop is contextual based. So if I have a selection tool and I right click anywhere, it will give me tool specific options specific to that tool. So if I had, let's say, a brush instead, and I right click, I have all my brush options. But if I have a selection tool, it's selection options. So when you right click with a selection tool, it will show you which layers are there and you can choose. So here I want to choose this tree, and if you notice, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on over here. So one recommendation I always make is come over here to your layers, and now, like we just said, it's contextual based where you click. So if I right click on the eyeball, I get one set of options. Lets you hide, show all other layers, or you can color your layer. So let's say I know I want this layer to be green. It's not going to color anything out here, it's just in the layers panel. You can use that to kind of identify layers that you don't want to miss. You can also click on the name. If you double click on it, you can rename that to whatever you want. So you can call that tree. It's good to kind of keep organized, because as you start working, you may have like hundreds of layers, and if they're all just called layer 1, layer 2, all the way to layer 55, it gets confusing. And then the last, well, not last thing, but another really useful thing is when you right click on to the right or on the name, you get these options. So there's a ton of options here. If you right click on the image, you get different options, and this is where I always tell people to go when they're starting off in Photoshop, just to set up their workspace so it's easier. The first one is, instead of using small thumbnails, click large. So see, immediately it's much easier to see in relationship to this. The next thing I do is, if you notice, this tree is pretty big, but over here it doesn't look as big as it could be, because you're seeing the entire file when you're looking in the window. So see, it shows you kind of the entire document, and then within it, it highlights that layer. If you right click and you tell it, instead of clip thumbnails to document bounds, you choose click thumbnails to layer bounds, that will zoom all the layers so that it's just that image. And typically I find that more useful to see the entire image than to know where exactly it is, because a lot of times you'll know where the image is, you just want to pick it, and you look over and the image is so tiny that you can't really tell. Whereas now it's super easy. I look over, I know this is the tree. You can select it, move it, or I can right click with the selection tool and grab that rectangle and move it. So that's just like the first thing. The next thing you'll notice is this has a little icon there, and that just means that this is like a smart object, so, or like a vector shape. This one here is really important. So that is what Photoshop calls smart objects. So it hasn't actually gone in. Photoshop is vector based, raster based. So in order for it to adjust these individual pixels, it needs to go in and assign a value to them. But when it comes in like this, since we just imported it, it's not actually gone in and it's not going to let you change the individual values of those pixels. So you can apply things like this. So if you look at the top, we have this, which is our blend modes. So we can change these. It was set to normal, so it just looks like your normal image. You can also go here and change that to darken, so you can't really tell unless you put it on something like that. So if we set it to normal, it just looks like you're stacking them on top, right? But then these are all, think of these as different ways for Photoshop to treat the value of those pixels. There's actually like an equation to each of these that you could look up. Some of them are really simple, some are really complicated. But Photoshop will assign a number to every pixel. So imagine the color white is number 1, and then it goes all the way up until you hit black. I think it's 255. So the multiply blend mode will just multiply the value of the pixel times whatever is below it. So if you have anything that's colored white, you basically get rid of it, because it's 1, which is the value for white, times whatever is below it. So 1 times any number, you know, is just the other number. So multiply is good when you want to get rid of the white. So let's say you have like a tree with a white background. If you set it to multiply, the white would disappear. Typically we use that a lot when we're using like line work for a rendering or for like a diagram, because the white background disappears. The opposite of multiply would be lighten, because instead of, or one of these like screen, so these will do the opposite, where it's like the lighter colors. So see, now you only see the lighter colors rather than the darker colors. And so these blend modes can change a lot depending on which one you pick. And oops, I'm on the wrong layer. So a cool way you can cycle through them is once you've picked one, you can use your arrow keys and cycle through the different blend modes and see how they look. So in a situation like this, it may seem weird, but that they're actually really useful. If you also notice here, the blend modes are grouped. So there's these different like horizontal lines, and then there's a series of them in a different horizontal line. So those are set up for a reason. So these first two is normal and dissolve. I rarely use dissolve, but normal is just normal the way the image is. So if we set that to normal, it'll just look regular. These that start with darken, it's easy to remember because darken is the first one. So those will prioritize the darker values of the image. So if you look, it's darkening that. And anywhere that the background image was darker than the foreground image, it will basically disappear. But if it's the value of whatever layer you're setting to darken it can darken the layer behind it, it will. Multiply just multiplies the values, and then color burn, and you can go down the list. There's different ways to do it, but these will usually make your image darker. The group that starts with lighten, these ones, like it sounds, will prioritize the lighter values. So these will typically lighten the image. A lot of times you end up losing some of the detail of what you're trying of the actual image, but that may be what you're trying to do, is just get the texture of it onto the word tutorial or something like that, then it would be fine. These ones are more kind of in between. The ones that start with overlay, they kind of add a lot of contrast sometimes, or they look at like the medium values. You have to be careful with some of them, especially the ones that start down here with difference, exclusion, and subtract, because you get some like really crazy looking stuff. So sometimes we use a blend mode to get like a selection, so you may need to change it, and then that is easier to select for some reason than when it was regular. Then you can switch it back after you're done. And then hue, saturation, color, and luminosity, these look at like these individual properties of the layer. So depending on what you're trying to do, you may use it. And there's no like right or wrong that says like, oh, you always need to set it to darken or always use overlay. There's some that typically work better, but there may be an image, and remember, it's also what images are behind it. So depending on what your layers are doing, there may be a different one that works best. So it's always good to start off with one you think is going to be close, but also check the other ones using the arrow keys, and if it turns out it was the first one, then you go back, but if not, you may find one that's working better. The next thing to pay attention to up here is opacity. So if we have this and we lower it, there's a bunch of ways you can do it. You can click this little arrow and bring this down. So let me set this back to normal. If I click this and bring it down, it's going to start to lower the opacity of my image. So instead of being 100%, let's say it comes down to 60. So now you can start to see through it, but the image is still set to normal. And you can combine these. So let's say I want to combine the screen, but it was too intense here, then I can lower. And so I just did a different way. You can also highlight the number and type in what you want, 60. And so that will go down to 60. You can also actually, the way I like doing it is you can click on the actual name, opacity, and drag to the left or drag to the right, and that will also do the same thing. So let's set this back to normal. You can hit enter to get out of that, because sometimes you get stuck in this. If you're ever trying to do something and it won't work, always check these two, because you may have this selected. Fill is similar to opacity. So some people think that fill is exactly the same thing, but in reality it isn't. So fill will control how much Photoshop actually shows the pixels of that layer, whereas opacity is the overall layer. So what does that mean? If you look down here at the bottom, you also have some options, right? So the first one is called layer styles. So if it has like an FX, so as if it's like special effects. So if you click that, you can apply certain things to your layer. So let's say I wanted to apply, I don't know, a stroke, or let's grab a drop shadow. So this allows you a bunch of controls, and if you look at also, you have all the other ones here, so if you want to check them on and off, you can do that. And it's added a layer here, like it has like layers within the tree. So these are the effects, and they have little eyeballs so you can turn them on and off. So you can move this panel wherever you want and look at your image, and you can increase or decrease that opacity. You can change the angle. You can add more distance, increase the spread, decrease the spread, however you like, size. And then this is the quality, or that's basically the fall off. So right now it's linear. You can also use a different type of fall off. So here it just starts getting like more light and then it ends, whereas here it may change, see, like that. And so sometimes you use these. I typically like to just leave it on that, or but it's up to you really. Another nice trick is you can actually, instead of worrying about the angle and the distance and all that, you can actually come over here. So let's bring this down. Instead of doing this and then trying to change the angle, you can just actually click right on it and move it. And if you look, this will change. So an important thing to notice that's happening here is we have this setting checked, which just says use global light. So I can hit OK, and then now if I move this over, I have the tree, it has its drop shadow, and if I lower the opacity, both the tree and the drop shadow, which are the effect that's on that layer, go down. Now if I lower the fill, the color of the tree, so the layer opacity is still going down, but the fill is still there. Do you see that? So the drop shadow hasn't changed. That's the big difference between opacity and fill. Some people think they're the same thing, but once you start adding layer styles, they're very different, because fill affects only this, opacity affects the entire layer. If we take, let's say, the text now and go to the effects, let's say I wanted to do a drop shadow here. If I change this angle, since it's using global light and that layer also had global light, you'll notice that as I move this one, it's going to change that one as well. It won't change the distance. See, I can make this one far or close, but the angle does change. So that's something to remember when you're using global light. Anything that's using global light has to use the same angle. For this one, maybe we do, let's try bevel and emboss, and then you can play around with that. Let's say maybe we turn this one up. This also has an angle and it's using global light, so if I turn it like this, see, it's going to move my drop shadow as well. So there we go, we can use that. And then just like what happened before, if I lower the fill, those little effects are going to stay. If I wanted to copy these and also apply the same exact effect to this layer, you can right click on the layer and say, you have a bunch of options here. The one we're looking for is this one, copy layer style. So if I click that, I can then come to this layer, or let's say I want to go to this layer instead. I can right click and just tell it paste layer style, and it will apply it to it. Since this was a black shape, it's kind of hard to tell, but let's grab the fill and make it like a different color there. So now you can kind of tell, make it a blue. So that's like the first kind of basics with this first one here. The next one is the layer mask. So what does the layer mask do? So layer mask is a really good way to imagine like masking tape. That's a good way to think of it, like painter's tape. Wherever you put a piece of tape, you're not going to be able to see that image. So it's like, imagine you had a projector and you put your hand in front of the projector. Wherever your hand is, you're not going to see whatever the projector was projecting. So if I come to this layer and click here, I've added the layer mask. So the important thing to remember here is you have the layer and then you have the mask. So I can move the mask or I can move the layer. They don't have to move together. If I uncheck this, I can move them independent. So when you click across, you can see how they highlight. The way the mask works is with black or white. So if I grab a brush here and you set it to black, so I'm going to just switch my foreground and background. I'm going to set it to 100% opacity just to show you now, and I'm going to use just a soft brush. So I'm going to increase the size. So if you use this key, it's a shortcut for your brush. So that one makes it bigger, this one makes it smaller. So select your layer mask and now click on your image. And wherever you click, it will look like it's deleting it. So let me turn off the effect so you can see. It looks like it's going away, but in reality, we drew here on the mask. If you want to see the mask, you hold Alt and click on the mask. So see there, that's what I drew. So wherever there's black, I'm hiding the image, but I didn't actually delete it. So if you right click, you can disable the mask. See, it's there, but when we turn the mask on, it's hiding that piece. So why is that useful? Let's delete it and make a new one. So there's two ways to make the layer mask. The first is that way. You click the button and then you draw on it and it will hide it. The other way to do it is you make a selection. So let's say I wanted to pick this shape so that it's in front of that, and I didn't want to move it above. I just wanted to crop this off. You can use any sort of selection tool. Let's use the wand. So I'm going to use the wand. I'm going to go to this layer and I'm going to pick here. Oops. Wand. Oh, here, let's turn off these layers. So I have this selection, and then now let's turn these layers back on. Now with a selection, if you mask, it will crop by default your image to be within that selection, and anything that falls without it, which would be in here, is going to get totally hidden by black. So if I click, see, it made a little block there, but if I try and move this layer now, you'll see that mask is also moving. So if you don't want that, you undo, hit Control Z, you just uncheck this little link here. Boom. And now I can select either the mask or the layer, and I can move it independent, and it will still remember that it's there. So this is what's nice. Some people say, why do you use mask when you could just erase? Once you've erased, you've destroyed those pixels and just basically gotten rid of them. There's no way to get them back. But this way, you can. I know there is a history which you can go back a certain amount, but let's say I'm working today and I close it and I come back tomorrow with a fresh new file and I'm trying to keep working on it and I decide, oh, I want to move this tree over. All of a sudden I have it cut off. I now have to re-import it, rescale it, and reposition it, and it's just a hassle. If you know you're never going to change it, let's say I know for a fact I want to keep it like that forever, and let's say you don't want your file size to be big, or you just really don't want the layer mask, you can right click on the mask and tell it, oops, I think I have a selection. You can right click on your mask. Why is it not? Do I have a selection? Oh, it's because this has not been rasterized. I can't actually do anything to it. So that's why it won't let me do it. So if I right click, so if you ever have this, and we want to adjust that image, you have to right click on this layer and tell it rasterize layer. So what that's going to do, it's going to now go in, see that little icon went away? So now I should be able to right click. I really don't get why. Oh, I think it's because those are off. There you go. Or maybe it was right there that looking at me the whole time and I just didn't see it. But you can apply layer mask. So now see the mask went away and it actually did cut this guy. So that's one thing. I typically don't do that. So if you ever want to undo, you'll notice that it will undo once, and then when you hit Control Z again, it redoes that thing they just did. To get around that, don't just hold Control Z, hold Control Alt Z. So if you do that, you can keep going back as far as your history will remember. So now I have it back to here, and I can move this guy. The next thing I wanted to show you guys is this one. So this is the adjustment layers. These are really useful. So let's click that, and there's a ton of things you could do here. Some of them will affect kind of like how the image looks. Some of them are like new things that you can add, and then some of them look at like basically like values of the color. These look at like changing the color and stuff like that, and then these kind of do different things to them. So let's start off with like hue and saturation. That's a pretty basic one. So in the layers you can do this. So this is different than going up here to image adjustments, hue and saturation, which you can do on a layer. Obviously I'm on an adjustment layer, so it's not letting me, but here it will let me. Adjustments, hue and saturation. So these are adjustments. I can grab the hue and saturation for this and say I want to desaturate the tree and lighten it. I can do that, or I can colorize it and make my tree any color I want. And once I hit OK, see, the tree is now that color, and I can't get that back. It's basically locked in. So I'm going to undo that, because what I want to do is I want to control where this happens. So with the hue and saturation as an adjustment layer, I can do the same exact thing. So I can do this, that, I can colorize, and see it's applying it to the whole image now. So why is it doing that? What that's doing is it's basically on top, so it's going down. So if I move this layer below the tree, you'll notice, well, I just colored everything that color, but the tree is now above it, so it's not being applied to it. So now if I move text below it, see that it's only applying to this. So if I move that, but some people say, well, why would I want that? What this lets you do is you can apply it to the whole thing. You can always go back and change it, and if you look, it created a layer mask for you. So if I want to adjust where it shows like that, I can use my brush, click my mask, and then draw here with black, and see I can now hide where that effect happens, wherever I draw black. And then I can still change this and it will adjust, just not where I drew black. So let's say I didn't want it to apply to all the other layers, I only want to create this effect on the tree. You can easily do that if you click here. If you click this, it will apply to, it'll clip this layer to whatever layer it's right next to. So if you click there, now it's only applying to the tree. The layer mask is still active, but it will only affect the tree. So if I wanted to make it look like this tree was lit up from the side or something like that, let's move the tree over. So this is cropped to the tree. So if you move the tree, it's only going to apply to the tree, but the mask is not following the tree layer. So let's grab our mask, grab my brush. Now I want to get this like all the way. And now here's where this can be really cool. So just with one layer like this, you can come down and then switch this color to white. I'm going to only use 20% opacity, so I hit the number 2, and then I'm going to just click and drag like this. So now I'm revealing that hue and saturation, but only where I want, see? And I can still go in here and adjust it. So maybe it's not bright enough, or it's too dark, or however you want to look at it. Like that, see? and you can always turn this on or off. And this lets you not only adjust with a layer mask the opacity, it lets you do the opacity here. So think of this as changing the opacity of every pixel in that layer the exact same amount. Now think of a layer mask very similar to opacity, but you control how the opacity works based off of how close to black you're drawing. So if you draw 100% black, it's basically 0% opacity. 0% opacity is the same as drawing totally black, 100% black on the layer mask. If you draw 50% gray on the layer mask, it's as if your image was 50% opacity. And what's nice is you can draw wherever and fade them in and out, so the layer mask lets you really easily fade in and out between two layers. So that's very useful, and that's here. Adjustment layers, you'll always be able to tell because they have this little icon. So let's say I wanted to add, let's say a solid color. So solid color is just going to be one color and it has a layer mask. So let me move this down. So I'm going to put that here. So now I have basically, you can use this as like a background. So let's say maybe I wanted this to be like a sky or something like that. So I can do this. And then I can grab here in the layer mask, I'm going to draw like a gradient up. So I can use the gradient tool or hit the G key. 20, I'm going to make sure I'm using this one, which is foreground color to background color, and I'm going to switch to black. You can always get to black regardless of what color you have selected. So let me get out of that. So you can pick any color, so red, and if you hit X, it will switch your foreground and background, right? And then if you hit the letter D, it makes your colors 100% black and 100% white, and then you can hit X to toggle. So you're never more than 2 keys away from black and white. So you just hit D and then you hit X. So I want to draw with black, so I'm going to try and hide it. So, and then the gradient, just dragging up and hold shift to just make it straight. So now it's going to look like I'm making this gradient, right? But in reality, it's not the layer isn't a gradient, it's still a solid color, it's the layer mask on it. So if I disable this, you can also hold shift and click on the mask to quickly enable it or disable it. And if you hold alt, it will take you into the mask. So that's what I drew, basically a real simple black gradient. But since remember we talked about where it's totally black, it's as if I lowered the opacity 100%, and where it's totally white, it's as if it was just left to 100. This is basically down to 0 opacity. And since it's an adjustment layer, I can now change that color, but the mask is still going to mask it off the same amount. So this is like kind of real simple way of controlling your layers. And this, I don't know why I would never need to make this kind of image, but it's good to kind of show you the idea behind them. So let's say I wanted to bring in a texture here. You can bring those in, and let's see what I actually have. Let's grab this image. So now I have something like that. Let me just make this bigger than my image. So now I have that as my background, and you can start to kind of move stuff around, do whatever it is you want. And you can see now the main thing I wanted to do is start getting different types of layers. The last two ones are, well, the last three, you can create groups. So let's say I wanted certain layers grouped together. Let's say these two layers are going to make up my background. So if I move this one on top, you can see that kind of like that. Let's say that looks great, that's the background I want. Maybe I want to set this to overlay so it feels kind of blue. So these are the two colors, the two layers I want as my background. This is your technical background. You can see right now it's locked, but you can unlock it by just clicking this. It becomes layer 0 just like any other layer. let's say I want these guys to be my background. So I can hold shift, select all three, and then if you click this little folder, it will group them together. And then you can call this one background or whatever it is. If let's say maybe you have 100 trees and you want to group all your trees together, or you had like 20 people, you make a folder with people. It's up to you. But that's how you would do it. Another way to do it would be select them, right click, and you go to group from layers. Same thing. It'll ask you to name them, background, and there you go. This one here is new layer. So let's say I wanted to make a new layer. So I'm here at the bottom. If I click this just with the left click, it makes a new layer on top of the layer I had. If you hold, I believe it's control. No, it's not control. It's alt, I think. It lets you name the layer. It gives you more choices. So you can say okay, whatever. If you shift click, oh no, I thought it was control. Yeah, it is control. Sorry. So let me do it up here so you can notice. So if I just click once, it made it above the tutorial layer, right? So I'm clicking new layer, it goes up. Sometimes you want to make a new layer below, and you end up doing this. You make a new layer and just drag it below. If you know you're going to do that, a little shortcut is you just hold control and click new layer. Instead of jumping on top, it will jump below. So it's a little thing, but it's kind of useful sometimes. There's no reason you wouldn't be able to move it manually, but it's nice to be able to do it sometimes on their own. If you want to delete a layer, you can either click on it and hit the delete key, or you can click on it and hit the little trash can here and just send it to the dumpster. And it'll ask you and say yeah. So I don't want to do that, but that's how you would do it. That's basically the whole function of this guy. That's these. If you look on top, we haven't talked about these. These will let you, they're basically like locks, whether you want to not let anyone accidentally move this layer or adjust the pixels or stuff like that, or you can lock all options or individual ones, and this is by layer. This up here is kind of useful too. It's a newer thing. It wasn't there before, but it's basically filters in and out different types of layers. So right now we have a bunch of layers, but they're actually different kinds. So you're seeing all layers now. If I click this, it will filter and take out all the layers except layers that are only like rasterized layers. So if I click that, the only one I have right now is layer 0. So if I turn it, if I just check it off, or I click here, see if you unenable them, it brings them back. If I click, so let's go here, let's turn them on. If I click this one, it's only, notice that the logo is the same. This will filter it so I can only see adjustment layers. So right now, the only adjustment layer that it's seeing is this one. Text will only let you see text. So just like it sounds, what is this one? Shapes. So I have that blue shape, and then this one is smart objects. So when you click that, it just only shows you. So notice these both have that little icon in the bottom right corner. If I were to right click and rasterize this layer, it will disappear here, but it's actually still there. It's just this. So this I rarely use, but it's there. It's nice. I mean, you can also do it like this. You can look at it by color or just by kind or however you want to do it. That's pretty much the basics to it. If you wanted to quickly make a copy of a layer, a nice shortcut is Control J. That immediately will make a copy. You can also right click. You have a bunch of options when you right click. You have blending options. You can duplicate the layers just like what I just did with Control J, but you can also, if you do this, our file is called untitled-1, that's why it's showing this, but you can make a new file. So see, now I have a new one with this guy, and it copied it in the same exact spot. And now any time I want to duplicate a layer, you can choose this one, or you can send it to the other file that's open or to a new file. So I can send it to that one. So see, it didn't do anything here, but here it copied it. The next thing, let's see. Oh, I right clicked on the effects and stuff, so that's why I did that. Here you have like some more options. Artboard from layers, convert to smart object. If you needed to do that, you can rasterize the layer or the layer style. Once you've rasterized the layer style, you can no longer change it. So let's say you had a drop shadow and you want to change the angle. If you've rasterized it, it's basically just a static image now. It won't update. Here's where you copy the layer style and paste it, or you can clear the layer style. So if it has a layer style, you hit this, see, it just wiped it out. So that's a quick way to get rid of it. You want to be careful about merging layers. Once you've merged layers, they become one image, and you can no longer select them separately. They are one flat layer. Flatten image will do all the layers into one, so be careful there. And then these is just like when we right clicked here, except they are over here. And so that's pretty much the basics to the layers. And if you have any questions, either leave me a comment below or just let me know. So thank you.